So I'm excited to introduce myself and then introduce our first speaker. I'm going to interview Celeste Edmunds, and she's the author of a book that was just released
6 months ago, December 3rd.
6 months is all. Yeah. So this is a new book. It's a lot. We're going to process it together and we're going to do it in the framework of a frequency model. So I'm going to introduce that first. We're going to talk through the frequency model. And then I'll introduce, like I said, Celeste and get her story. Okay, so we're going to talk about raising frequency in 5 life areas throughout the next 2 days. So I'm going to give you kind of this framework, like I said, for the frequencies and vibrations. So some of you are maybe super familiar with this. Some of you, it might be new. Everything radiates at a specific frequency in the field of consciousness. Low vibration on a continuum to high vibration. Emotions, think about that. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Attitudes, music. My husband and I go to all different things. And last August, so just about a year ago, we went to the symphony in, it was an outdoor symphony. And we also went to Pantera in the same month. So there's a wide range of frequencies. I had never listened to that, music that you're like, that they scream into the microphone in a really deep voice, right? It was different, but it's different frequencies. So there's no judgment. And I want to clarify that, no judgment. It's actually really, there's a ton of contrast and it creates a more, a continuum in life of experience. And, literature, same way. There's books or movies you can experience, and it takes you on a different journey, right? So they all hold frequencies and calibrations. So this is where it came from. So there was a week, and I'll give you my really quick bio. I'll tell more about myself tomorrow, but my experience is that I lived in a low frequency. I was addicted to cocaine in the 80s, and I had not really, I never really opened my heart. By the, through my childhood, I experienced trauma as a child, and I created a completely blocked energy field. And so I did not really connect to people. So I had what some people call a reactive attachment, or, I didn't attach, I didn't bond. And so I could dump a friend or dump a boyfriend, no emotion, no guilt, no empathy. And so I was living in that world. And then I had a spiritual awakening. Now, it was not as profound as Vinny's, but it was a 3-day process, which is interesting. And it was something that was overnight. I was a different person. And so I skipped some levels probably and ended up in this vibrationally very different place, and then had to make sense of my life around that. So I changed my social life. I ended up going into a substance abuse career after that. So I changed my college plan. I changed a lot of aspects of myself, I guess you could say. But it was because I was changed. And so that's, I guess, something to look at in this model, is that it's not necessarily something everyone will experience quickly. I mean, it could be a very long process, and not everyone will experience a lot of shifts throughout a lifetime. Some people will experience many. So I ended up working in a jail where you see there's a huge opportunity in that world for change, right? So the average frequency of a jail is below 100. It's around 50. But if you watch someone who has a transformational journey, they can go from that low frequency and climb at a trajectory that just blows people away. It is truly miraculous. It is not something we can explain, right? So it was actually working in a jail where I was given, and it was interesting because it was in the same week I was given 2 resources. And at that time I was 15 years clean. And so I was still figuring out where my journey was taking me and what was next. And so that's where these came from, is these 2 books showed up in my face in the same week. And one it's an LDS based book called Spiritual Progression in the Last Days. And the other one was Hands of Light by Barbara M. Brennan, which is a very energy medicine type kind of manual. And So very different, but both of them had 7 levels. And it was really intriguing to me that it was 7 levels. And so I started working with that framework, and I have been working with it ever since. This was like almost 20 years ago. So it has become, like, for one, the pyramid. So in this pyramid model, you can see from a 100 frequency to a 700. And part of what's interesting about this is if you were to actually draw the pyramid to represent the population, you would need like a house for the bottom level and a P for the top, right? So it's very much, you can't really see it on paper. Basically, if you look at financial frequency calibrations, at a 100 frequency, you have millions, hundreds of millions, I believe, people in poverty on the planet, and you have a few hundred, maybe 1,000 billionaires at a 700. So that's the contrast. And if you look at that in spiritual terms, you may see similar things. And it's just something to consider, like very much a pyramid. So Dr. Hawkins was the next person I found on top of these other 2 books, and he had calibrated these frequencies. And so his frequency calibrations indicate that at a 600, you have enlightenment. So enlightenment is what Buddhist monks talk about. It's what, like in one of our trainings, in liberation training or quantum wholeness meditation training, we talk about a study that was done with Sufi masters, Franciscan nuns, and Buddhist monks. And there is an actual change in their brain signature, in their in a certain part of their brain that shows that they've created a oneness, that in that part of the brain, typically there's boundaries that separate us and them. It's basically where the ego sits. And that part of the brain has actually shifted toward oneness, which is, when I talk later, I'm going to talk about some of the names I've added to these. And oneness is at that highest level. So with this journey, we're going to try to break it down over the next 2 days so you can see it in terms of different areas. Another little fun thing is like tuning forks. Who's familiar with tuning forks? Somebody see how they work? Annie is. Okay, Annie, do you want to jump on and tell us, how does a tuning fork work? Or what's unique about this? You can just read it. But you know what this is.
Yeah, well, I guess my experience has been through massage. And so they use to understand the vibration in my system and to kind of influence a stationary object to move it, right? And so to kind of move through my system.
Like singing bowl, sound therapy is more common now. Mm-hmm. So you can actually shift biological states with sound, which is amazing. But in general, a tuning fork is that if you get one tuning fork vibrating at a certain frequency, it'll connect to the next one and they'll all kind of harmonize, right? They'll all they influence each other. So if we raise our frequency, we literally have influence on others around us. And that can go both ways. Like you can have a very dysfunctional individual in your space and it will affect you. And you can have a very high frequency. And I'm so excited. This is going to be part of Celeste's story. She tells about that. And we can make a difference even in a grocery store with our frequency, right? Yeah. And so, okay. So this is Dr. Hawkins' map on the left. I don't know if you can see it as well, but it shows you like this kind of line in the sand at a 200. And under 200, you've got negative emotions. And those can be everything from anger, fear, apathy, guilt, shame. And so you can look at like, if someone's sitting in a prison, like we talked about, imagine they're living in apathy, guilt, and shame, right? A lot of them, or there's anger, but there's kind of that range and they're vibrating there, right? And so then you have the freedom we talk about in liberation training, that because you don't have to be in prison to live in those low frequencies, believe me, right? So this can just be your day-to-day life that you are pulling up old memories and garbage from your past or whatever, and just swimming in it. And so, just our mental states can take us into a low frequency. And our mental states can also elevate us. And so you can see in the top, courage. I love that. Neutrality. I am a fan of neutrality. Willingness, acceptance, love. And so you can see that this elevates to these higher frequencies. And I think actually it shows enlightenment at 700, but anyway, it's up there, right? So there's a ton more on this. I do an entire training on the frequency model and walk people through like exercises and processes to look at where in your life you've got your anchors or your low frequency. It's in math, the lowest common denominators, like the number that's underneath and what can elevate you. And so that's part of frequency school. Or frequency school is part of what we're going to talk about in a minute with the Love Solve Academy. Frequencies happen in each of these life areas. And this is where I haven't really seen a ton of talk about this, but I actually developed an assessment tool. So you can actually get a score in each of your frequency areas and look at where's your frequency health of your physical health. What's your frequency with your mental, emotional health? Where is it with your spirituality? Where is it economically? Where is it socially? Where is it personally? So you can kind of just see this is there might be, I've definitely met people who are very high frequency spiritually. And then when it comes to money, like they scrape by. And then I've seen the other way around. I see people who are very high frequency financially, but if you're having a conversation about emotions, they would you're not going to get anywhere, right? So there's disparity in our frequencies in different life areas, and knowing where you're at really can help you define what's next and where, if you were to raise certain areas, everything could elevate. So that's what the frequency school is about. Okay. Oh, and this is a way to kind of chart it. It's kind of fun. So this is looking at like physical health, for example. And I might come back to this as I'll introduce this a little bit when Vinny comes on. But with the social side of life, I think this is what's going to be really interesting as we talk through Celeste's story, is learning her world in our social system has gone. This is what's so huge. It's just a remarkable story to look at where she's been and where she's gone. And then we'll come back to this as we go through, we've got speakers tomorrow. They're going to talk about the financial side, the emotional side, and the spiritual side. And so you're going to be hearing about this. I will now introduce officially Celeste. And as I do that, I'm going to hold up her book. So I got a copy of one of the first ones that came out. And in here, I'm basically, I'm going to give her background, which is that she's a mother of 3. She's the executive director of the Christmas Box International. So that's a whole story in itself. That is an organization that helps abused, trafficked, and neglected children. And their goal is to keep sibling groups together, I believe. And so that is one of the missions that they have. And that when you hear her story, you're going to know that matters. And her story was the inspiration. I did not know this. The inspiration for the international best-selling book, Finding Noel. So the Christmas Box House is a charitable organization founded by Richard Paul Evans. And Richard Paul Evans also wrote Finding Noel. And so, that's amazing. I just read that not too long ago. So that's really fun. I have to go back and connect the dots. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce Celeste. I'm going to do a little bit of an interview style. She's going to tell parts of her story, and then we're going to connect it back to the frequency model to just kind of see how her journey moved through the years. I think you said you usually start off with the beginning, right?
Well, in this situation, when, you and I talk about the frequency model and I look at change of heart and awakenings and all the things you'll bring up, I thought, it would probably be best, and given the time, to say that, like many children, I would say I was born into a family with a mother and father who had very high hopes and dreams that they would give their children a better life than they'd grown up with. Until the age of 3, I was in part raised by my uncle and aunt. We lived with them, and my biological parents basically had a built-in support network of a family that rallied around what I've been told interviewing my biological parents since writing my book, this very happy baby girl. And then when we moved out and we were on our own, my parents had a second child. So their addictions, financial struggles, and my biological mother's rape at the age of 15 greatly began to impact her ability to be a mother, and the things for us began to change dramatically. So I would say by the great big age of 5, my dad was barely around, and I became a mother of my sister, Tawny. I could cook and do laundry, and by the age of 7, I was walking her to and from school, bathing her, helping her with her homework, tucking her into bed at night, singing her favorite song, Silent Night. And I think for those that know or raise children very young like that, what happened to me is that my role in parenting her really became my purpose. And so to live and protect her was my sole purpose at all costs. But this purpose came at a high price when I decided to also protect my mom and sell myself to pay her drug debts. At the age of 7, after the state intervened, you would think that's the shift where things are supposed to get better for a lot of children in these environments. And for me, moving around to different drug rehabilitation programs with my mom did not help, because this role really intensified for me to protect my sister. And I believe that strong as a mother at that young age, my sole purpose, even over protecting myself, would just resurface again and again. And I began making decisions to protect her by either fighting, or I call it, making deals with the enemy in order to keep them away from her. And by the age of 8, and not really understanding all of the quick moving dynamics, or if I was a risk to my younger siblings at all, the state intervened, and me and my siblings, my brother and sister, were separated. I lost them, and we were eventually adopted into different homes. And it was, for me, at a very young age of 8, was the very first time I would say that I started feeling what it would be like to lose purpose. I was eventually adopted into a home at the age of 9 as a Christmas gift to my younger sister at the time, which came with very severe consequences for breaking the rules. And my life became an ongoing circle of abuse, neglect, fear, and the constant rejection by my adopted mother would eventually lead to me running away and being sent back quickly, only to be taught that I made things worse by trying to run. So by the age of 15, I really felt that there were only 2 choices for me. I was either going to kill my adopted mom or let her kill me. So I ran away. I slept on bleachers for a while at my high school, and then I lived with a friend whose family intervened and took me into their home. And then I eventually dropped out of high school. So at this time, I also had been rooted very heavily by my first adopted family into this very deep belief system that was rooted by religion. And I was taught that I would be bound to this abusive mother for all time and eternity. And at that point, after losing my siblings, all my biological family connection, and now being, told I was unloved for 7 years, I completely spiraled by the age of 15. It took me about a year to get my grounding and move around enough to, I eventually moved in with a woman named Carly, whom my book, Garbage Bag Girl, is dedicated to. And I always say she's not the woman who birthed me, but she is the woman who gave me life. And she adopted me for a second time at the age of 26, long story short, after I'd married and had 2 children. And it was really at that moment that her message, and really, our family mantra is home was where they have to keep you, was where I would say my first change of heart moment happened. And so that was between the age of 9 and 26. It was through her opening up her home, and my sister, who happens to be on this call as well, Sylvia, opening their home and changing my heart. It was these decisions of love and hope and forgiveness that started to help me raise my frequency to a level that at least allowed me to move forward for many years. I also at that time, as we talked about earlier, began working for my co-author and friend, Richard Paul Evans. I was actually his assistant when I was 21. And at the time, he was in the religion that I had grew up with this belief. And he kind of just noticed this big spiritual gap in me. And one day we had a very emotional conversation, and he asked, why are you struggling believing in this higher power and, what God looks like for you? And I shared with him very frankly that I would not believe in a God that would force me to be with an abusive mom forever, for not just, on earth, but forever and ever. And it was the very first time he, took my hands and said, I'm so sorry you've been wronged all these years. It was the religion. It wasn't the religion. It was the people that abused you. And it was really, truly next to my experience of being adopted into my family that I call home today. The first time my heart really opened up and was freed, that since I was 9, that it was maybe this option for me to find this new spiritual path. In the book Garbage Bag Girl stops at that time of me being adopted a second time. And what it doesn't talk about, that is in books to come, is that unfortunately, what started for me, Garbage Bag Girl, the name is about moving with my items in a garbage sack every 6 months, like many children, the 500,000 children in foster care in the United States do. But it also has turned into this bigger message of what we do to ourselves over time when we constantly don't own our own voice, when we don't write our own story, when we don't raise our frequency, when we don't work on our resiliency skills, and what happens in the brain around being a garbage bag girl. It's much more than just moving your stuff around. I unfortunately ended up divorcing and launched into really 20 years of toxic relationships. And it wasn't until making the very difficult decision to write my story, then publish it, that I started owning my own voice and what you would refer to probably.
Yes. Okay, I want to pause you though, because you just covered so many areas. Okay, so I want to walk through it. And then I want to go there because that's where I wanted to spend more time. Totally. Okay, so let's walk through, because where you shared your experience was that you actually didn't enter the world at a 100 level. And I think most people really don't. I think that's why children are kind of this asset, even in a dysfunctional family, because they enter the world at a higher frequency than their parents. And this actually happens in a lot of cases, even not this severe dysfunction, but in cases where adults have not done the work on their own emotional or their childhood, they'll lean on their children because of their essence being at a higher frequency. So, okay, so let's kind of talk through this. So when you actually went to 100 level frequency, it was more as an adolescent when you just decided you threw out I call it the oars. So in my story, it was I threw out the oars, said, I'm not even rowing anymore. Just going to go downstream. And you hit in, the addictions and the, not showing respect for yourself, I'm sure. And all these things that are part of the shame, and the drama of the victim story. And so at a 100 level, we're more attacking ourselves even. There's more of a perpetrator, energy to this a lot of times. And it's destructive, right? And there is harm to self, even if it's just massive overeating, right? There's been times with my eating, I'm oh yeah, that was really abusive to myself, And so we can go there as pretty functional people, high risk behaviors, driving with our cell phones, trying to multitask in ways that is not sane, really, addictions that cause harm to others, and mental illness. And this is one that we can't even blame the person. Typically they're, you get these genetics and it throws you into these states and you don't really know what you're doing, shame and crippling insecurity, Suicidal ideation, hopelessness, despair, deep depression is a 100 level. So people can usually relate to this on some level. And I think living in it does happen. And it does happen from, rough out, upbringing. So there's that. Okay. Then we'll go to the 200. So at a 200 frequency, and I've worked in rehabs. I've worked in several rehabs lately, and I keep trying to find one that high enough frequency that it's going to do the real magic. That's a whole story in itself, but a lot of times a system like the foster care system is really only a 200 frequency, right? So yes, you had your physical needs met, and emotionally it was a nightmare, right? And so sometimes that averages out, I guess, to where it's like, well, you're in survival mode. So 200 is really pretty much in survival mode. You're not drowning, but you are not in a position to thrive. And so that dependency on non-solutions, that could be meds, could be financial assistance, it could be, the system of, a mental health or rehabs. Look at how many rehabs you walked in and out of, right, with your mom, and your mom was probably at that 200, like just going through the motions. And so and sadly, we have a system that enables, and that's part of that 200, is that we're really not solving the problem. So addictions with lower risk and harm, like marijuana, emotional ups and downs, financial ups and downs, self-esteem being low, fragile, depending on others, not having our own voice, right? That general sense of being stuck, going in circles. So that's a 200. And a lot of people can relate to that. Sadly, that's where Dr. Hawkins says 200 is the average of our population worldwide. So this is not a good place. This is a survival mode, right? So, but it is common, very common. The 300, and this is what's kind of fun. So there was a point where you decided you wanted to be better. And I love it. Will you spend more time talking about a little bit about when you met this woman that inspired you, and what age were you?
Irene, yes, I was 15. I'd spent everything for me would happen in 6-month increments, which are very rapid shifts, but yes, every 6 months, not 7 years, 6 months. Yeah, I was 15. I had dropped out of high school, and I was living with a woman out of state in Arizona. She was the first person I'd seen that looked healthy, behaved healthy, ate healthy. She just refused to put anything into her system that wasn't organic and the best of the best. And she had a very strict, routine, what she did in the morning and how she behaved.
Routine. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. Yes.
Yeah, it was very routine, and she was diligent about it. And there was nothing routine ever that had happened in my life. So I was very attracted to this idea that here was a 50-something-year-old woman, and I'm a 15-year-old girl, and I'm watching her live her life with such structure and routine that, and she was diligent and very conscientious about it. And I, for the first time, thought, I don't ever want to be this again. I want to be that. And it was what she exemplified, how she radiated her spirituality and her love for life. And it all came down to what she put in it and what she put out and how she received and how people she chose to be around. I mean, it was just, everything was so detailed in her life that it was the very first time that I thought, I don't know yet how I'll get there. I remember thinking, obviously I'm this person today, but that's who I want to be. That was the very first experience I had with that.
Oh, that's awesome. So she was probably at a 500 plus, would be my guess, but her default was probably her routines. And so you saw that basic default as like, and I would guess 300 is probably her bottom. Is she would just go back to routine, right? And this is miraculous for people that, for some of us, 300 is the top end. And when you understand this whole model, 300 can be the foundation. And that's what was huge for me. So this is where actually the 300 level is actually the average in the US. So if you look at third world countries, obviously you get lower. But if you look at an industrialized nation, I hope we haven't gone down in the last few years. Hopefully we're still at least a 300, we'll see. But that's where what holds society together. And the term I use for 300 is social obedience, where society functions off of routine and structure. And someone asked me to put this back up. So yes, I'm going to go over it. So doing good in the world. So the social workers, the teachers, you deal with you experience emotional challenges in certain situations, but you don't live in a mental health crisis day by day. You take on projects or careers with a hero mindset. And I think that hero mindset is what inspires some people, and that's where I think we decided Celeste was as a child, that you were the hero for your siblings and your parents. Like you had a role and function. And that's the upside and downside of a 300 is there's a role and function, but it also limits you, or it puts basically an identity around you rather than having you find it as a true organic experience in yourself.
It's bringing you joy because you can help and thrive in the hero mindset by helping others. But I think it takes a brand new shift to get to the next place of self-love and finding your spiritual path.
Yes.
So you're stuck in what you can do now, and it feels safe. It's safe, especially if you've been at
it is secure. Yeah, it's secure.
Feel safe.
There's paychecks.
Misleading.
There's paychecks out of 300.
Yeah.
You can depend on certain systems to operate. But your self-esteem is tied to personal success and achievements or external, like roles. And then there's the comparison downfall, because at a 300, it is really like you're trying to keep up with the neighbors, right? It's like, okay, do I have enough stuff? Do I have enough letters behind my name? Is there, enough in the bank? And it's really about enough, a lot in a 300. And there's conflicts in relationship because at a 300, there's a lot of ego still. So what's interesting about the 300 is that the ego of, if you look at the villain, which is very low frequency, is structured around that role. And obviously we don't want more of that. There's still ego around the victim. So the victim carries an ego structure. But what's interesting is that the hero also carries an ego structure. And so that's what I think, for me, it wasn't inspirational to look at a 300 frequency in my journey. Like that's not where I was inspired. So, okay, so we'll go beyond that. So that's where the 400 comes. So the 400 is where that motivation is intrinsic. It is heart-based. It is like the passion comes from within. Dramatic changes will spur emotions, but they're managed. So like you deal with something that's really bumpy, and if you hold that 400 frequency, you get through it, but it's bumpy. So it can be uncomfortable. There is a change of heart, and you include in that the breaking of the heart, right? So the fluctuating self-esteem, but you start to exchange that for the true sense of self. And then progression driven by purpose and the entry into unknown territories and the unique path. So I imagine you can relate to this from like your world of divorce, right?
Yeah, and I think 400 level also for me touches on, especially if you're building a business or you're running a charity or you're writing, you're trying to,
so like
it's like there's an imposter syndrome that keeps creeping up that I think is very, very much lives in the 400 world. Like, why me? You start to question why me, because your self-esteem toggles back and forth.
The why me, exactly. You're very intuitive. Okay, so at the 400 level, like you get this. At the 400 level, you'll lose your job and you'll be like, why me? Too. Like things will be taken from you and you can go into a spin emotionally. Or you can start to elevate your thinking into there's a purpose in this. It can be heart-wrenching. It can be like
A lot of goodbyes.
a lot of goodbyes. Yeah. Like you were talking about the dysfunctional relationship. So as you start to live with this higher level of, you know, who you are, like you start to realize, oh, I've put this in my life because I didn't have the, you know, maybe the insight or the awareness, the boundaries or the, you know, and you realize this is in your life from an old frequency. And then as you elevate, you realize what you've got to do something with that now. So, yeah. So you went through the journey of relationship challenges.
Many divorce goodbyes. Yes.
Yeah.
And in part, there's you know, we were talking about this, you and I earlier, that I think once you go from a 200 to a 300 or a 300 to a 400, you turn around and look back on your life. And even though you're toggling in the new space, there's kind of a bigger depth of kind of understanding yourself and knowing quicker, I can't go back there. So you
Yes.
can't turn around and go backwards without being very conflicted in who you are.
Yeah.
So, right, you're toggling a new space
Mhm.
and you're moving through the new place, but you're still turning around and looking like, but I'm really not going to go there. I'm not willing to go back there. And I think that's important. I think that that's useful to give yourself, progress alignments, and to remember that loving yourself, finding your spiritual path back to your higher power, surrendering to the universe, understanding your why,
Mhm.
practicing self-love is such a better place and deserves a lot of grace in yourself when you're transitioning through the frequencies. I think you have to allow yourself a lot of grace in recognizing where you're moving and how you're moving to and from, and just really give yourself that kindness and that grace. Because like you mentioned earlier, I think also I would say, like for me, publishing my book had to happen in order for me to make these changes. I
Okay, I want to segue to
wouldn't
that.
have left my relationship. Yeah, I just wouldn't
Yes.
make the changes without it.
So I want to go back to at the 400, the emotional work is the deal. Like there's emotional work with all your relationships, including, like, as we go through this, it'll be interesting to kind of see how it connects. But we use two different tools in our Love Solve Academy. And one is the Love Solve method, which is a way to process through emotions in all your relationships. And one of those is money, one of those is God. And that's where I think when you talk about that moment with Richard Paul Evans, that there was you had to resolve your emotional state with God before you could go to the next level.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, okay. So now we get to segue to the 500. Okay. So I'm gonna go back to my screen and the book came out because you shifted from that 400 to 500, and that's such a powerful shift. So what was like the roller coaster at a 400, at a 500 becomes mastery and steadiness, which is amazing. The changes, you actually surf them. So we talk about the roller coaster model. So instead of like being strapped into a roller coaster and having to ride it, it's like you're elevated and you now get to kind of actually view the roller coaster. But triggers become more rare and personal healing more complete. The sense of self is freed from the influence of the ego. Purpose is given rather than driven. Isn't that an interesting idea? And the new path is shared with others through voice, word, leadership, and influence. And so here you are, 500 frequency. Tell us about your world as you, like in the last year. Well, we met. Okay, so let's talk about when we met. That was fun.
We met 2 summers ago at one of Richard Paul Evans' writing retreats, and you were at a very transitional place. I was at a very transitional place. So we were roommates, but there were like 5 of us. So there wasn't a lot of sharing of stories. But for me, that was a very pivotal time because driving to that retreat, I had just really had a very intense conflict around, I've been sick a lot. So my physical frequencies were very low. I had an immune disorder. So I was in a very toxic relationship with somebody of 15 years. And I knew I had to go, but it was complicated because of kids and all the things. And I remember driving to that retreat and knowing that I was given a deadline by Richard Evans to finish my draft there. And I remember I was listening to an Audible called The Universe Has Your Back.
Oh my gosh, Gabrielle Bernstein.
Yes, great book. And crying, of course, and all the things, and thinking, wow, this surrender bit is really quite a big conversation to have with myself. I was new into my executive director role with Christmas Box at the time, just barely a year in. And I still had a very stuck space of, I can't finish this book. I can't reach this new peak of spiritual alignment. There's something that has to give. And I started listening to this Audible, the whole 5-hour drive. And that was my answer. Celeste, you haven't surrendered. And I remember thinking of the Jim Carrey Yes movie, where he's like, I'm just going to say yes to everything. And I was like, yeah, what the heck? I'm just going to be the yes girl. More from a spiritual concept. And I opened up and went to this retreat. And that's when I met Vinny and you and just many wonderful people, and had this very big awakening that I can't go back to a life that I had. I can only move forward. And it came with a lot of grief that I knew I would have to deal with. I knew I'd have to have a conversation with my girls around, leaving a marriage again. And we'd already been through that. And so it was much more, Sean puts in the chat are the relationship challenges because you're not elevating with while your partner is not. For me, it was much deeper than that. It was fundamentally not the same people. It's one thing.
I have an answer to that too. And it's
be like, well, we're kind of growing, but it was not that. It was a very, very toxic, very unhealthy, very obviously toxic relationship. But
would you agree relationship challenges are ego-based? Pretty much carte blanche.
Yeah, including yourself.
They're ego-based.
Yeah, I think
so relationship challenges are friction and mirrors and polishing, and it's all about the structure of the ego and the evolution from ego to the higher self. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if you both aren't wanting to search for your higher power, you're both not wanting the same alignments from a very driven character perspective, that's a very hard place to fundamentally not start from.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that was a massive shift. And I had went on another retreat immediately following a very spiritual retreat, not a writing retreat, immediately from the ranch author retreat, where I had went into it with an intention that I'd never asked myself before. And that was, what would self-love look like? I don't know.
Wow.
I mean, I was like, I'm just going to throw it out there. What would that look like? And I have this amazing 3-day experience of, it downplays it to describe how truly beautiful it was, because it was the most enlightening weekend of my life that took me down a corridor, if you will, of remembering very spiritual moments I had as a child that I couldn't figure out what they were. That all the unhealthy abuse experiences I had a very specific moment that I don't talk about very much. And it was a left hand on my left shoulder, 100% of the time would happen to me during awful experiences. And I would have a sense of peace completely overwhelm me, that you will not die, you will be safe. And during this weekend, that feeling came back to me. And I had left Vinny, so he can talk about this later if he chooses to. I left him from the ranch where he'd given me these crazy out there, but very true feelings and reasonings for things happening to me. And I was like, I mean, okay, you're a great guy and all, and I really want to believe it. And I like, he's so in tune that it's, you know, you're like, what the heck? And then I moved to this new journey following that retreat, and it happened.
Wow.
I made a choice to surrender. I had my
surrender.
And I went to this other retreat and I surrendered, and it all unfolded exactly the way he said it would. And
that's amazing.
It elevated me to a new place of, okay, own your voice. Do not be fearful of it. You get the wonderful opportunity to run an organization that provides shelter and essential items for 155,000 abused, neglected, trafficked, and homeless children. We keep 1,000 siblings together every year between our 3 shelters. No child has left one of our shelters in 28 years with their items in a garbage bag. You're welcome. And when a system has gaps, you know, we get creative. And I think for me, forgiveness of self included in that, forgiveness and gratitude have to always be a forefront, because I get this really cool experience now to say, okay, here's a little girl who did not understand a complicated and clunky system. She gets to thank those that tried to help me. And I get to remind them that even though, you know, we're being removed from our homes, no matter whether you feel the decision is right or not, we all who work with children have to remember that there's still great losses and there's still great grieving. And I speak about that because I speak about the ability to elevate children in those moments, including our own child. You know, you talk about that all the time. Voice. And I think for me, that elevation had to happen in order to do that.
Yay. That was beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you. That was a beautiful finale. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slides because I want to kind of also clarify that what you're talking about is beyond. Oh, and we've got to see where to find you. So this is the question comments. She's open to hearing from you. Celeste at thechristmasbox.org. Look at that. Okay. What website, celesteedmunds.com, and that's in the chat as well. And the book, I'm definitely getting the Audible, and I've got like 3 copies, but I just don't sit and read. So I've got both, which will be great.
Just a heads up, it is me reading or saying, you know, reading the Audible. So it tends to make people, once you know me, feel a little. It starts off low frequency, the book.
It is hard.
But it's hard. It ends high. Yeah. So there's that.
Yes, there you go. It's good.